A mile deep in West Virginia, our dynamite blasts were supposed to expose coal, but instead, they opened a perfect black archway. From that archway, the silence called my name. The darkness in a mine ain't like any other darkness. Up on the surface, even on a moonless night, there's a kind of softness to it. Starlight, the glow from a town 20 miles away. Something. Your eyes adjust. Down here, a mile deep in the gut of West Virginia, the darkness is a solid thing. It's a physical presence that presses in on you, so thick you feel like you could grab a chunk of it. It swallows light, it swallows sound, and if you're not careful, it'll swallow you too. I was 21 when I learned that lesson. My name's Jed, and for 3 years, the Blackwood Colliery had been my whole world. My dad worked here, his dad before him. It was in my blood, they said, the same way the coal dust was in my lungs. I liked the work, mostly. There was an honesty to it. You versus the mountain. And there was a rhythm. The groan of the conveyor belts, the hydraulic hiss of the longwall shearer, the steady drip, drip, drip of water seeping through a billion tons of rock above your head. You get used to the sounds. In fact, you learn to love them. It's the silence you got to worry about. Silence is what comes right before the world ends. The old-timer on my crew, Silas, he used to say the mountain was alive. "She breathes, Jed," he'd tell me, his voice a gravelly rumble over the noise of the fans, "and she don't always like us poking at her ribs." He'd been down here 40 years and had a face like a topographical map of every seam he'd ever worked. He was superstitious as all get out. Never whistled underground, always left a piece of his sandwich for the Tommyknockers, the spirits of miners who'd been lost. I used to chuckle at it. I was young, full of piss and vinegar, and believed in steel supports and methane detectors, not ghosts. Our job that Tuesday was pushing into a new section of the C-seam. It was virgin territory, according to the company maps, solid coal, ready to be carved out. We were a blasting crew, the guys who opened the way. We'd drill the holes, set the charges, retreat to a safe distance, and then thunder. The fun part. After the dust settled, it was my job as the junior man to go in first, check the integrity of the new roof, and make sure the ventilation was cycling properly. Standard procedure. We set the charges, a neat little pattern drilled into the coal face. Silas double-checked everything, his hands moving with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who'd done the same thing 10,000 times. "This one feels different," he muttered, wiping sweat and grime from his brow with the back of his glove. "Different how?" I asked, coiling up the detonator wire. "Dunno. The rock. It's quiet. Too quiet." He tapped a timber support beam with his knuckles. The sound was a dull, dead thud. "Just be careful in there after she blows, you hear me? Don't trust the maps more'n you trust your gut." I just nodded. It was Silas being Silas. We retreated about 300 yards back down the main tunnel, huddled in a reinforced alcove. The klaxon blared 3 times. I put my fingers in my ears, even with the plugs. The foreman hit the plunger. The blast wasn't the usual crump boom that rattled your teeth. It was a deep, resonant thump, like a giant heartbeat that shook the very bones of the mountain. It was deeper, heavier than any blast I'd ever felt. The air pressure pushed past us, a hot, dusty wave. Then the silence, the real silence, the kind Silas was always talking about. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like an hour. "All right, Jedediah," the foreman's voice crackled over the radio. "Dust is settling. Go see what we got." I clicked my lamp to its highest setting, grabbed my scalar bar, and started walking. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt powder and pulverized rock. My headlamp cut a bright white cone through the haze. As I got closer to the blast site, I noticed something odd. The debris field wasn't as big as it should have been. Usually it was a chaotic mess of shattered coal and rock. This was contained. And then I saw it. The blast hadn't just exposed a new coal face. It had blown a hole clean through it. But this wasn't a jagged, fractured opening. It was an archway. A perfect, smooth, black archway, about 8 feet high and 4 feet wide. The edges were so clean they looked like they'd been cut with a laser, not blown apart with dynamite. The rock wasn't the familiar layered shale and coal of the seam. It was something else. A type of stone I'd never seen before, glossy and black like obsidian. And it felt warm to the touch. It seemed to drink the light from my headlamp. I stood there, my boots crunching on the dusty ground, just staring. This wasn't on any map. There were no geological surveys that mentioned a hollow space or a different type of rock formation behind the C-seam. This was impossible. "Jed?" You got eyes on? What's the situation? The foreman's voice sounded a million miles away. You need to see this, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. There's a tunnel. A tunnel? What kind of tunnel? An old shaft? No, I said, running my glove over the impossibly smooth surface. No, this ain't ours. It looks ancient. It's carved. Perfectly. A long silence on the radio. Then Silas's voice cut in, strained and tight. Jed, you get back here. Right now. But I couldn't. It was like a magnet was pulling me in. A strange curiosity, stronger than any fear, stronger than Silas's order, gripped me. The air coming out of the archway was different. The mine air was always damp, heavy, and smelled of earth and machinery. This air was cool, clean, and utterly still, and there was no sound. From inside that tunnel came a silence so profound it made the silence after the blast feel like a rock concert. The constant drips and creaks of the mine were just gone. I'm just going to take a quick look, I said into the radio, my voice sounding braver than I felt. Just a few feet in. Make sure it's stable. Like hell you are, Silas yelled, but his voice was already starting to fuzz with static. That ain't right, boy. That's a dead place. Get back. I ignored him. My training screamed at me to wait, to follow orders, to let the engineers and geologists handle it. But I was 21, and I had just found something no one in the history of this mine had ever seen. I took a step through the archway. The change was immediate. It was like stepping into a vacuum-sealed chamber. All the ambient noise of the mine vanished. My own breathing sounded like a hurricane in my ears. The temperature dropped a good 20 degrees. I shone my light down the tunnel. The beam, which could normally pierce a quarter-mile of darkness, seemed to get swallowed up after about 50 feet. It didn't reflect off anything. It just stopped, absorbed by a darkness that felt older and deeper than the rock around me. The floor was as smooth as the walls, a single piece of that same polished black stone. There were no tracks, no timber supports, no signs of any mining activity, old or new. It was a perfect sterile corridor leading into nothing. I took another few steps, my magnetic boots clanking unnaturally loud in the dead quiet. Anything, Jed? The foreman's voice crackled, now almost lost to static. It's clean, I managed to say. It just keeps going. I took maybe 10 steps in, the archway of familiar mine behind me. I felt a low hum, more of a vibration in my teeth and bones than a sound. It was a deep, resonant frequency that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I turned to look back, to see the comforting, chaotic sight of the blast site, and my heart hammered against my ribs. From this angle, the archway didn't look like an opening into the mine. The light from my headlamp reflected off the dust still hanging in the air out there, making it look like a shimmering, hazy curtain. And through that curtain I couldn't see the tunnel I just walked from. I couldn't see anything but swirling gray. It was like I'd stepped through a one-way door. Panic, cold and sharp, stabbed at me. I spun back around to face the darkness of the new tunnel, my breath hitching. The humming stopped. The silence rushed back in, 10 times more oppressive than before. This was a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. I needed to get out. I fumbled for the radio on my chest harness, my fingers shaking. Silas, Foreman, can you hear me? Only static answered, a thick, roaring static that grew louder and louder. And then, cutting through the noise, just for a second, came a sound that wasn't static at all. It was a voice, a clear, impossibly close whisper, right there in my ear, that spoke a single, chilling word. It said my name. My blood went ice cold. It wasn't a voice carried on the air. It felt like the words were formed directly inside my skull. Jedediah. Clear as a bell, intimate as a lover's whisper, and utterly ancient. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My lungs were paralyzed. All the air was sucked out of me, and the profound silence of that tunnel rushed in to fill the space. For a split second, I was just a statue of terrified flesh, my headlamp beam painting a useless circle of light on a floor that drank it down like water. Then adrenaline hit me like a physical blow. It was a primal, mindless command. Run. I spun around, my boots slipping on the slick, unnatural stone. The archway, the shimmering portal back to my world, looked impossibly far away. It was only 10 steps. I knew it was only 10 steps. But in that moment, it felt like a mile. The tunnel seemed to stretch, the perspective warping like a bad dream. I scrambled, not running, but clawing my way through the thick, oppressive air. My breath came in ragged, panicked sobs that were deafening in the absolute quiet. Every part of my body screamed that I was being watched by something I couldn't see, something that had been waiting in that solid blackness for a very, very long time. I didn't dare look back. I just fixed my eyes on that hazy curtain of light and dust and threw myself towards it. The moment my helmet broke the threshold, the world came roaring back. The sound was a physical assault. The hiss of the air vents, the distant groan of machinery, the frantic, static lace shouting from the radio on my chest. It all hit me at once. The air was thick and gritty again, and the familiar smell of damp rock and diesel filled my lungs. I stumbled out of the opening and collapsed onto my hands and knees, gagging and coughing, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. Strong hands grabbed my arms, hauling me to my feet. It was Silas, his face a mask of fear and fury under his helmet. "What in God's name were you thinking?" he roared, his voice shaking. "We were shouting for you. Radio was dead. You were in there a minute, maybe two, but it felt like a lifetime." It spoke to me, I gasped, my words tumbling over each other. "Something in there." It whispered my name. The foreman, a big, no-nonsense guy named Rick, pushed forward. "What are you talking about, kid? Bad gas. You hallucinating." He shone his own powerful lamp at the opening we'd just blasted. "What is this thing?" I got my feet under me and turned, leaning on Silas for support, my heart still trying to beat its way out of my chest. I pointed a trembling finger. "See? It's not rock. It's smooth. It's carved. It's not natural." Rick squinted, stepping closer. He ran his heavy glove over the edge of the opening. "Smooth? Kid, this is a mess. It's a standard fracture." "What?" I pushed away from Silas and stumbled to Rick's side, shining my own lamp on the spot. My blood ran cold again, but for a different reason. The perfect laser-cut archway was gone. In its place was a jagged, ugly crack in the coal face, surrounded by shattered rock and splintered shale. It was a completely ordinary result of a dynamite blast. There was no glossy black stone, no perfect symmetry, just a dark, unstable-looking fissure leading into more rock. "No," I whispered, touching the rough, gritty edge. It was coarse and cold, just normal rock. "No, that's not right. It was different. It was open. It was a tunnel." I looked frantically from the foreman's confused face to Silas's worried one. "I'm not crazy. I walked into it. It was dead silent in there, and the air was cold." Rick put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Easy, Jed. The blast can do funny things. Shockwave can mess with your head for a minute. Let's get you back to the lift. You took a good knock." They half walked, half dragged me away. I kept looking back over my shoulder, my mind reeling. Was Rick right? Did I imagine the whole thing? The smooth arch, the unnatural silence, the whisper. But it had felt so real. More real than the gritty tunnel I was standing in now. By the time the shift manager and a couple of company engineers got down there, my story was the stuff of ridicule. They sectioned off the area not because of some ancient tunnel, but because their instruments showed the fissure was structurally unsound. The official report called it a geologically insignificant but unstable fissure caused by an unexpectedly concentrated blast charge. They dismissed my account as post-blast disorientation, bad gas, shock, lack of oxygen. They had a dozen clinical explanations, none of which included a perfectly carved obsidian tunnel that whispered your name. Most of the crew treated me like I'd seen a ghost, which to them was maybe even worse than being crazy. They gave me a wide berth, muttering under their breath. Only Silas stuck by me. He cornered me later by the lockers as we were cleaning up. His face was grim. "I don't think you're crazy, Jed," he said, his voice low. "I felt it too, right before the blast. That quiet. That ain't the mountain's normal quiet. That was something else." He looked around to make sure no one was listening. "My granddaddy, he worked the old number 4 shaft before it flooded. He used to tell stories about places like that, places that ain't on the map. He called them hollow spots. Said the mountain was like an old cheese, full of holes that don't lead nowhere good. Said some things are better left buried." He clapped me on the shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. "You were lucky to get out, boy. Whatever you saw, whatever you heard, you leave it be. Some doors, once you open them, they never fully close." His words should have been a comfort, but they sent a fresh wave of ice down my spine. The company put me on light duty above ground for a couple of weeks. Observation, they called it. I tried to forget. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination. a waking nightmare brought on by dynamite fumes and stress. But I couldn't. The experience had left a stain on me. At home, in the quiet of my small apartment, the silence started to feel different. It felt heavy, expectant, like the silence in the tunnel. I'd be watching TV and suddenly feel a chill, the kind of cold that came from the inside out, and I'd know that silence was there, just behind the noise, waiting. Then the whispers started again. Not my name, not anymore. Just faint murmurs on the very edge of my hearing. I'd whip my head around, thinking someone was in the room, but there was never anyone there. I stopped sleeping more than an hour or two at a time. When I did drift off, I'd dream of that perfect, light-swallowing darkness, and I'd feel that low, resonant hum in my bones, a hum that felt like a vast and ancient engine idling just on the other side of reality. I was coming apart. I knew it, but telling someone would just get me a one-way ticket to a padded room. Silas was right. I had opened a door, and it hadn't closed. The problem was, a piece of me was still on the other side, and a piece of whatever was in there. It had followed me out. The uncertainty was eating me alive. Was I losing my mind, or had I stumbled onto something terrifyingly real? After 3 weeks of this slow-motion collapse, I knew I couldn't live like this. I couldn't live with the doubt, with the fear, with the constant creeping dread that I was being watched from a place I couldn't see. There was only one way to know for sure. There was only one way to get an answer. I had to go back. I had to see it again with my own 2 eyes, away from the foreman and the engineers and their rational, world-shrinking explanations. That Friday night, I broke into the shift manager's office. My hands didn't even shake as I jimmied the lock on his desk and pulled out the master key for the service elevator. I packed a small bag, a high-powered flashlight, extra batteries, a length of rope, and my dad's old .38 revolver, heavy and solid in my hand. I didn't know what good a gun would be against a whisper, but it was better than nothing. Just after 2 a.m., the mine was a ghost town, silent save for the hum of the main ventilation fans. The night watchman was asleep in his shack. I strode past him, my heart a cold, steady drum in my chest. I unlocked the elevator cage, slid the steel door shut, and hit the button for the C-seam. The cage lurched and began its long, rattling descent. A mile straight down. Alone. Back to the place that had haunted my every waking moment. Back to the door I should have never opened. As the surface lights vanished and the solid, absolute blackness of the mine enveloped me, I had a single, chilling thought. What if this time the tunnel didn't let me leave? The descent was a slow-motion fall into the abyss. The rattle and clang of the elevator cage, sounds that had once been a comforting part of my daily rhythm, now sounded like a funeral dirge. With every 100 feet we dropped, the air grew thicker, heavier, the pressure building in my ears. I was leaving the sane, sunlit world behind, and I knew, with a certainty that settled in my gut like a lead weight, that this was a monumental mistake. But turning back was no longer an option. The not knowing was a cancer, and this was the only cure I could imagine, even if the cure might kill me. The elevator shuddered to a halt at the C-seam level. The doors groaned open onto a scene of profound stillness. During a shift, this place was a hive of activity, the roar of machinery, the shouts of men, the bright cutting beams of a dozen headlamps. Now, it was a mausoleum. My footsteps echoed unnaturally in the vast, empty tunnel. The only sound was the distant, asthmatic wheeze of an auxiliary air pump. I switched on my powerful flashlight, its beam a solid white spear cutting through the darkness. The familiar walls of rock and coal seemed to watch me, ancient and indifferent. I knew the way by heart. Left at the main junction, then a straight shot for a half-mile. The yellow tape and warning signs marking the unstable fissure were still there, flapping gently in the faint breeze from the ventilation system. Danger. Do not enter. Geologically unstable. For a moment I just stood there, shining my light on the jagged, unremarkable crack in the wall. It looked exactly as it had 3 weeks ago. A simple, ugly wound in the rock. There was no smooth archway, no hint of the impossible thing I had seen. My heart sank. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was all in my head, a trick of light and shadow, and a mind rattled by a dynamite blast. Disappointment, sharp and bitter, warred with a small, cowardly flicker of relief. I could just turn around, go back to the surface, and try to piece my life back together. But Silas's words echoed in my mind. Some doors, once you open them, they never fully close. I had to be sure. I ducked under the yellow tape, my flashlight beam probing the darkness beyond the fissure. The company engineers had said it was a dead end, maybe 20 feet deep, choked with loose rock. I needed to see for myself. I squeezed through the narrow opening, the rough rock scraping against my jacket. Inside, it was tight. The air was stale and dead. The beam of my light illuminated a small, cramped cavern filled with rubble, just as the report had said. It was a dead end. My shoulders slumped. It was over. I was just a guy who'd had a bad reaction to some dynamite fumes. I was just crazy. I turned to leave, and that's when I felt it. A draft. A tiny, almost imperceptible current of cold air on the back of my neck. I froze. The auxiliary pump was behind me, in the main tunnel. The air in a dead-end fissure should be perfectly still. I turned back, sweeping my light across the pile of rubble at the far end of the small cave. The draft was coming from there. It was faint, but it was undeniable. It was the same clean, cold air I remembered from the tunnel. My heart started hammering again. I scrambled over the loose rocks, my boots dislodging showers of pebbles. Crouching down, I pushed at a large, flat slab of shale near the bottom of the pile. It shifted. I pushed harder, grunting with the effort, my muscles straining. It moved a few more inches, and the draft intensified, carrying with it that profound, unnatural silence. There was a space behind the rockfall, a dark, hollow space. It took me 20 minutes of frantic, adrenaline-fueled work. I moved rock after rock, my hands raw and bleeding, until I had cleared a hole just big enough to squeeze through. I poked my head and flashlight into the opening, and there it was. My breath caught in my throat. The perfect, polished black stone. The impossible, light-swallowing darkness stretching away into infinity. The tunnel. It hadn't been a hallucination. It was real. The company hadn't found it, because the blast had collapsed the entrance, burying it under tons of ordinary rubble. They saw the rubble and just assumed it was a dead end. They never looked behind it. A wave of vindication washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. I wasn't crazy, but the vindication was immediately followed by a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated terror. Because if the tunnel was real, then the voice was real too. I should have backed out then. I should have scrambled out of that fissure, run to the elevator, and never looked back. But I couldn't. What was this place? Who had built it? What was waiting in the darkness? The questions were a hook in my soul, pulling me forward. I had to know. I checked my flashlight, took a deep breath, and slid my body through the narrow opening. The transition was just as jarring as the first time. The sounds of the mine were instantly amputated, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like a pressure against my eardrums. The cold, still air wrapped around me. I stood up, my light cutting a lonely path into the gloom. The tunnel was exactly as I remembered. A perfect, featureless corridor of polished black stone, stretching away further than my beam could penetrate. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin and pathetic in the vast emptiness. The sound didn't echo. It just traveled a few feet and died, absorbed by the walls. It was like shouting into a pillow. I started walking. My magnetic boots made a dull clank, clank, clank on the smooth floor, the only sound in the universe. I unholstered my dad's .38, the cool weight of it a small, inadequate comfort in my hand. I walked for what felt like an hour, though I knew it was probably only 10 minutes. The tunnel never changed. No side passages, no markings, no change in elevation. Just the same endless black, sterile corridor. It was mesmerizing in a horrifying way. My mind started to play tricks on me. The darkness ahead seemed to pulse, to breathe. I kept thinking I saw movement at the edge of my flashlight beam, fleeting shadows that vanished when I tried to focus on them. The low hum I'd felt before returned, vibrating up through the soles of my boots, a deep, subliminal thrum that seemed to resonate with the very marrow of my bones. I stopped and shone my light back the way I had come. The small rubble-strewn opening back to the mine was gone. I knew it had to be there, but from this distance it was completely invisible, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. I was an island of light in an ocean of absolute black. For the first time, I felt a deep, gut-wrenching sense of being lost. Not just lost in a tunnel, but lost from the world itself. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, at the very edge of my light's reach. Something on the floor. It wasn't a rock or a shadow. It had a definite shape. My curiosity warred with a primal instinct to turn and run. Curiosity won. I approached slowly, the revolver held out in a shaking hand. As I got closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a mining helmet, An old one, the kind they stopped using 20 years ago. It was dented and coated in a fine layer of gray dust. Next to it lay a corroded battery pack and a length of coiled wire. A few feet further on, I found a pickaxe, its wooden handle strangely preserved, its steel head rusted but intact. It was a miner's gear. My light swept further, and my blood turned to slush in my veins. It wasn't just gear. It was a skeleton. The bones were scattered, picked clean, and had a strange brownish tint to them, as if they'd been scorched. The man's coveralls were mostly rotted away, but I could still make out the faded patch of the Blackwood colliery on a scrap of fabric clinging to the ribcage. He'd been one of us. How did he get here? This tunnel wasn't on any map, old or new. No one had ever been reported missing from the sea-seam. It made no sense. I crouched down, my light playing over the grim scene, my mind racing. Then my beam caught something glinting near the skeleton's outstretched hand. It was a small brass tin, the kind old-timers use for chewing tobacco. I picked it up. It was surprisingly heavy. I pried open the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of blackened petrified tobacco, was a chunk of rock. But it wasn't coal or shale. It was a strange crystalline ore, a pale milky blue that seemed to glow with its own faint, internal light, pulsing in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. It was beautiful and deeply unsettling. As I stared at it, the hum in the walls grew infinitesimally louder, and the blue light in the crystal pulsed in perfect time with it. I snapped the lid shut, my heart pounding. This is what he found. This is what he died for. I needed to get out. I needed to take this back, show someone, prove I wasn't crazy. I shoved the tin in my pocket and scrambled to my feet, turning back the way I had come. And I stopped dead. The tunnel behind me was no longer empty. Standing about 100 yards away, just at the edge of my flashlight beam, was a figure. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its limbs too long for its body. It was completely black, a silhouette that seemed to be cut from the very fabric of the darkness itself, absorbing the light so perfectly that it had no features, no depth. It was just a man-shaped hole in the world, and it was perfectly, utterly still. My breath hitched. My hand holding the gun trembled so violently I could barely keep it aimed. It hadn't been there a second ago. I was sure of it. It had made no sound. It had just appeared. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I was just a rabbit caught in the gaze of a python. Then, very slowly, the figure raised one of its long, thin arms and pointed, not at me, but past me, deeper into the tunnel. And from the impenetrable darkness ahead of me, a soft blue light began to glow. And I heard a sound. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was the sound of something immense being dragged across the stone floor, a slow, rhythmic scraping that echoed from the deep, and it was getting closer. My mind fractured. Two distinct and terrifying things were happening at once. In front of me, the scraping sound grew louder, closer, accompanied by that pulsing blue glow that painted the smooth black walls in an eerie, strobing light. Behind me, the silent, man-shaped void stood its ground, a sentinel of the abyss, its arms still outstretched, pointing me toward the approaching horror. I was caught, a piece of bait in a trap 1 billion years old. The choice was simple. Be caught by the thing I couldn't see, or run toward the thing I could. Every instinct, every fiber of my being that wasn't paralyzed by sheer terror screamed at me to go back. But the figure behind me was a negation of reality, a silent, absolute wrongness that my brain couldn't process. The approaching sound, at least, was a physical thing. It was a threat I could almost understand. My survival instinct, twisted and mangled as it was, made a desperate calculation. It chose the devil I could hear over the devil I couldn't. I turned and ran, not back toward the mine, but deeper into the tunnel, away from the silent watcher. My flashlight beam bounced crazily, illuminating the endless corridor. The scraping sound was deafening now, a terrible grating of stone on stone. The blue light ahead grew brighter, resolving itself into a distinct source. The tunnel opened up. I burst into a cavern so vast my flashlight beam couldn't find the ceiling. It was a perfect spherical dome, and the polished black stone of the walls was crisscrossed with pulsing blue veins of the same crystalline ore I held in my pocket. They all converged on the center of the cavern, where the source of the light and the sound was located. It was a creature, or a machine, or both. It was a colossal, crystalline heart, 10 feet high, glowing with that soft blue light, pulsing in time with the deep hum that now vibrated through the entire chamber. Attached to it were dozens of spindly, insect-like legs made of the same black, light-swallowing material as the silent figure. With each pulse of light, the legs would drag the massive crystal a few feet across the floor, leaving deep gouges in the stone. It was mining, not with machines or dynamite, but with its own body, scraping its way through the rock, harvesting the blue ore. It was the source of the tunnel. It hadn't been built, it had been eaten. I stared, mesmerized by the sheer alien horror of it. This was the Tommyknocker. This was the thing in the deep places of the earth that the old miners whispered about. It wasn't a ghost. It was a life form, so ancient and so different it might as well have been. The skeleton I'd found. He must have stumbled in here just like me. He saw the ore, this impossible wealth, and the creature saw him. The creature stopped dragging itself forward. The pulsing light intensified. It had noticed me. A low, clicking sound, like a million pebbles being shaken in a jar, echoed through the cavern. It was a sound of inquiry, of hunger. Then I remembered the tin in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hands slick with sweat, and fumbled with the lid. I opened it, and the small chunk of blue ore inside pulsed brightly, in perfect sync with the colossal heart in front of me. The clicking sound softened. The creature's terrifying advance paused. It was looking not at me, but at the crystal in my hand. And then I understood. The whisper. Jedediah. It wasn't a threat. It was a call. The skeleton miner had taken a piece of it, a piece of its food, maybe even a piece of itself. It had been calling, not for me, but for the piece I now held. The silent black figure was a shepherd? A lure? Something to guide me, the new bearer of the lost fragment, back to the whole. I had two choices. I could try to run, but I knew I'd never make it. The black figure was behind me, and this creature, slow as it was between me and the only exit. Or I could give it what it wanted. My heart hammering, I took a step forward, then another. The creature remained still, its light pulsing, its clicking sounds a soft, expectant hum. I walked until I was only a few feet from it, the blue light washing over me, the hum vibrating in my chest so powerfully I thought my ribs would crack. I held out the tin. For a long moment nothing happened. Then one of the spindly black legs detached from the main body and moved with a horrifying, liquid grace. It wasn't solid. It flowed like thick oil, forming a delicate, multi-jointed limb that reached toward my hand. It didn't touch my skin. It carefully, precisely plucked the glowing blue crystal from the tin. Then, just as smoothly, it retracted, re-merging with the central crystalline mass. The moment the crystal was reabsorbed, the entire cavern flared with a brilliant, blinding blue light. The hum intensified into a single, pure, resonant tone that vibrated through every cell in my body. It wasn't a sound of aggression. It was relief, satisfaction, completeness. The light faded back to its soft pulse. The creature made one last soft clicking sound. Then it turned, impossibly, and began to drag itself away, scraping a new tunnel deeper into the uncharted blackness, leaving me alone in the vast dome. I stood there, trembling, my knees weak with relief. I turned slowly, half expecting the black silent figure to still be there. But the tunnel I had come from was empty. Whatever its purpose had been, it was fulfilled. It was gone. The journey back was a blur. I don't remember much of it, just the single-minded focus on putting one foot in front of the other. I scrambled through the rubble-choked opening, back into the familiar dusty air of the Blackwood colliery. The hiss of the air pump was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I didn't stop running until I was in the elevator cage, my hand shaking so hard it took 3 tries to jab the button for the surface. As the cage ascended, I looked at my hands. They were scraped and bleeding, covered in grime. In my left hand I still clutched the brass tobacco tin. I opened it. It was empty, save for a few crumbs of petrified tobacco. My only proof was gone. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? I quit my job the next day. Rick, the foreman, just shook his head and said, "I knew that blast rattled you more than you let on." Silas was the only one I said anything to. I found him sitting on his porch, watching the sunset. I just looked at him and said, "You were right, Silas, about the hollow spots." He just nodded slowly, his ancient eyes seeing more than I was telling him. "Some things down there are older than the mountain," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You were lucky she let you go." I moved away from West Virginia a week later. I got a job working construction, up in the open air, under the wide sky. I can't stand enclosed spaces anymore, not even elevators. And I can't stand silence. I have to have a fan running or music playing all the time, because sometimes in the dead of night, when the world gets quiet, I can still feel it, a low, deep hum vibrating in my bones. And I know, a mile beneath the surface, in a darkness no human was ever meant to see, the old heart of the earth is still beating, still scraping its way through the rock, forever hungry, forever calling for the pieces of itself that were lost. I went into that tunnel a boy who believed in steel and dynamite. I came out a man who knows with absolute certainty that we are living on a thin, fragile crust over a world of secrets too ancient and too terrible for us to ever understand. And sometimes we dig too deep.